Dr. Kelly Brogan is in the studio. Welcome to Why Isn't Everyone Doing This?
Thank you.
I feel like if I had asked you that question 20 years ago, you would have had a very different answer than you would have 10 years ago.
Yes.
And you would have had a very different answer than maybe if I had asked you 10 days ago. And I really want to celebrate you that when I asked you and your team, I was like, all right, so when Kelly, what would she like to talk about? Why isn't everyone doing blank? And you were like, I do not answer pre-interview questions, which good for you.
It fucks with my flow.
Good.
Yeah, I just need to be inspired in the moment.
Yeah.
Shall we say.
The first time I ever gave a talk was actually in LA, and I was after Jim Carrey and before Eckhart Tolle. I was like a teeny tiny little baby meditation teacher.
Wow.
And I looked at the program and Eckhart Tolle said, because everyone was just like, Emily's teaching on meditation. This Michael Bernard Beckwith is speaking on this. And Eckhart Tolle said, content will be determined in the now. And I was like, yes, sir. Way to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you that question right now. Has there been a time in your life where you felt so inspired by something, so lit up, that something helped you so much that you really truly felt like, whoa, why isn't everyone doing this? And obviously I know everyone is an asterisk because no medicine is good for all people, but you know, the large majority of the humans, like life would be better, the planet would be better, I would be happier if more people did this thing.
Like, of course, the first thing that came to me is dancing, singing, right? So like, why isn't every woman dancing and singing? And of course, there are a million reasons why we're not. But I think that the more rooted answer is the first couple of experiences that I had, feeling I call it like a little no, and honoring that, right? So meaning like feeling it's time for me to get up and leave, or feeling like I don't want to go to that dinner, or feeling like that experience is not for me, that man is not for me, that woman is not for me, this, situation is not working for me. And actually finding the words to reflect that behaviorally. The first couple of times I had that experience and stopped, not that I'm always committed to this, but I do a way better job than I used to, and stopped settling and tolerating, I had that feeling of like, why isn't everyone doing this? Why haven't I been doing
honoring
this?
Your no? Why isn't everyone honoring their no?
It's just so organizing for every aspect of life and everyone else around you. It just is easier. It is so much liberated energy. And so I don't know, that's what comes to me. I remember early on having that feeling of like, this is what we need to all be doing. We need to actually say no when we mean no. And of course, the opposite is true too, to say yes when you might otherwise shrink, avoid, dismiss. If you have that little yes, that little bit of curiosity, that little impulse. I think especially creatively as women, this is a big thing for us. That's why we're not singing and dancing. Maybe it's because we have a little yes and then we have 100 big no's that we pile on top. And so we self-abandon in that way. Yeah. So why isn't everyone saying no when they mean no? I mean, of course I know why, right? Like I devoted my entire career to understanding why. It's a complex answer, but.
And we can get there because I think that certainly like consent culture, consent with yourself, like safety, there's so many things that are baked into that if we had the tools to honor our no. But before we get into that, I just want people to understand the depth and breadth and tapestry that is you. One of the things that I'm most enamored by with you is your ability to change your mind, your ability to be
for
like,
better, for worse.
I really truly was like dedicating my life to advocating for women to be able to have access to medications, to have access to different types of care. And then when it came to me, it was like, oh, I don't want to be on those medications. Right. And then you've dedicated your life to helping people come off of them and start to heal their own internal chemistry. And as of late, you've really been helping people reclaim their bodies, reclaim their singing and dancing, maybe even reclaim their no. So I would just love to hear from you, like the journey that feels important to share as it relates to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because it could be a 3-hour answer.
Sure.
And I will give you the Cliff's Notes because I recorded my first podcast last year was 25 ways that I've become what I've judged. And it could have been 125 ways. I mean, there are so many examples.
So the first podcast you recorded, your show is Reclamation Radio,
yes,
which I freaking love that name, Reclamation Radio. I think I discovered it or rediscovered you right about the time I was doing a live event called Reclaim. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. So your first episode was called 125 Ways.
No, it could have been. It was 25 ways that I've become what I've judged.
I have become what I've judged.
Yeah. And there's so many. I mean, from the mundane to, cats are gross, to being literally the cats in my home are deities. They run the place, and everybody in my life knows that, to, you mentioned my fingernails. I used to be like very adamant about like clean, short nails. And that's the only way a professional woman should, wear her nails. And now I like spend an inordinate amount of my life thinking about the next color and, to the bigger issues, whether it's perspectives on the shape of the earth, on allopathy, on history, about gun regulation. I mean, you name it. I mean, there's just a million ways that I have been very convinced that I had figured it out, and very convinced also that those who didn't agree with me were ignorant or worse. And the humility, obviously, that's required to cross the bridge and find myself again and again and again. I would say the most recent topic that I'm still sort of like roiling in is feminism and, traditional man-woman gender roles and things like that. I'm like, wow, yet another topic. Even, I'm doing a masterclass next week on like sort of psychospiritual dimensions of entrepreneurship and my relationship to money. I have 1000% become that which I've judged, even in that dynamic. I mean, it's pretty much every arena of my life. And so the archetype switching, shape shifting, the evolution that is certainly non-linear has become like a meta process that I now trust. It's like we were referencing earlier. So when I get that little feeling that is like there's something more to explore here, I listen to it. I pay attention to it. And now it's like the piss is taken out of it. Like now it's like, oh my God, I was fucking wrong about that too. Like, how is there another thing? And it's funny. It's fun, especially in the intellectual sort of realms. I would say that, I have colleagues who teach me about how, DNA isn't actually a proven thing. Cells don't actually have the organelles I learned about in biology class, let alone medical school. And, we're not actually breathing oxygen. We are actually transferring negative electrons. It's not what we thought. There's so much myth busting in these sort of academic circles that I run in, that now I'm almost in this protoplasmic place of like so much I don't know. Yeah. That when you hear me speak, and it might happen over the course of our time together, and I sound like I have figured it out, that's a shadow flavor, that is still present, because I learned in my upbringing, as so many of us did, that when you're right, you are safe. So I still,
And it's so fun to be right for like a minute.
For a minute.
I really like that short-term dopamine hit. It's like that fourth scroll on Instagram feels so good. And
I know.
The 100th
I'm absolutely still vulnerable to it. But the delight in, I call it wearing the villain crown, the delight in being bad and wrong and just laughing about it. That was a process. I don't mean to like trivialize it. But anyway, so I think what's most relevant is that I was raised, like so many in my generation, to imagine that this is a meritocracy, that I'm here to get an A on life. And I was praised for my achievements, for my accomplishments, for my doingness rather than my beingness as a woman, as a little girl, which I'm sure you and your listeners are familiar with David Data's work. That's a masculine shell that I put on my feminine essence and identified with throughout the course of my life. And I got to this place in my life, where I had all of these accolades and achievements. And I remember the feeling even when my first book through, who knows how this happened, because it was highly blacklisted and I didn't get a single interview in the media, and it made the New York Times list, right? And I remember getting the call from my agent, and I felt like a moment of excitement, but I really felt like not much, So I started to encounter these moments in my life that had a celebratory quality that wasn't felt. Right? There was like a hollowness, an emptiness even, that attended even the seeming like peak experiences of my journey. And I think that's when my soul began to rattle her cage, and I was called on a deeper journey, right? Because my first rupture with the system was around my diagnosis. I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Well, that's not really true. It backtracks to when I was pregnant and I was prescribing to pregnant and breastfeeding women psychotropic meds, and very much believed that I was like a champion feminist, helping women like achieve stable lives despite their diseases, right? Despite their broken brains and their faulty chemistry and their like hapless genetic, circumstances. And so I was pregnant and I was prescribing, I think it was Zoloft, to a woman who was pregnant. And I just had that dissonant voice arise that said, I would never take this medication. And here I am saying, talking to her about the 25,000 cases in the medical literature that substantiated the relative like safety of this medication. And there's not really a signal of harm. So it's better that she treat her depression than not, obviously. And really, I only thought about like psychotherapy as being a legitimate alternative option. And it wasn't really even that. So I ignored that voice and I went on to have a natural birth, not because I was some sort of like connected, earth mama, sister goddess, like, channeling the energy of all creation through my body, but because I was a know-it-all and I had an OB in the beginning of my pregnancy. I didn't like her, personality. And so I started to try to prove that some of the shit she was saying was wrong. So I went into the literature. I was very comfortable with that based on my, training in the reproductive literature. And I started to research like episiotomy and fetal monitoring and, C-section and all these different interventions that like I might encounter in my process. And I was like really righteously offended by how little evidence obstetrics brought to the table. It was like less than 30% of obstetrical interventions are actually like tier 1 evidence-based. And of course, in my psychiatrist, turf, I was like, oh, those OBs, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And, so I came to the conclusion that no interventions were acceptable because of the evidence. Again, like not because I want to have some spiritual experience. So I had a natural birth and it was like, like powering through a marathon.
And you were at home or in a hospital?
No, I was in a birthing center.
Birthing center, okay.
Because I didn't know any woman who had had a first pregnancy home birth. Like I just didn't, that wasn't in my field, which is part of why I've become such a believer in like the imperative to share and celebrate like different aspects of one's life experience so that others know what's possible, you know, because I just hadn't encountered it. I'd also begun to research like the medical interventions that would have been introduced to that baby. My Italian gesticulation is like getting in the way of this microphone.
I like it.
And so I opted out, of all the medical interventions that would have been offered my baby. Again, not because I understood anything about holistic health or really had anything other than like derision about that. Like I was like, alternative medicine is dangerous. And it was 10 months postpartum that I was on a routine physical diagnosed with autoimmune condition. And that same voice came up and was like, I'm not taking this shit. Like, I'm not taking medication. I'm not walking to CVS every month, to fill my prescription for the rest of my life. And there has to be an escape hatch. So when I, through naturopathic lifestyle change, very basic nutritional shifts, I mean, basic, but a big deal, because I grew up Italian American. I was like bread and cheese for every meal pretty much. And essentially I eliminated those two. And I watched in black and white my antibodies and my TSH come into the normal range. I saw it on paper. And I was like, instead of being like, oh my God, this is amazing, I'm cured, I was really fucking pissed. Like, I was
what were
taking
you
my
pissed at?
sword out of my sheath, I mean, now I understand the psychology of this, pretty archetypal. It was what psychologists call a rupture of empathy. So where I had thought this system was here for me, right? Like, I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and blood, sweat, and tears into my, oh my God, infinite sleepless nights, into my training.
To become a medical doctor.
And here they had lied to me, right? I felt betrayed.
About diet, about thyroid,
about the relevance
medicine.
of diet. I had an hour of which most, at that time anyway, most med students have an hour of nutrition.
Just one solid hour.
No, literally.
That should do the trick.
Actually, because it's really otherwise diets, so there's a cardiac diet, there's a diabetic diet, but there's not really, it's like a window dressing. It doesn't really have any actual relevance in your treatment plans or treatment approach. So yeah, I didn't learn anything about diet being relevant, and I didn't learn that you could put autoimmune condition into remission. That was even possible.
It's we can't be something if we can't see something.
Yeah.
So the fact that that wasn't even in your field, how would you know to even manifest it or move towards it?
And it makes sense that now I look back and I look at pharma and I look at allopathy and I'm like, it's a butcher. You don't go to get a vegan meal at a butcher, right? They weren't selling that. So why the indignance? Why the sense of betrayal? But when you parentify these authorities, that's part of the process of individuating from them, when you feel they've let you down and betrayed you. So I really felt a personal, intense heart level betrayal.
Yeah, because it's your identity, it's your time, it's your money, and it's now your body. So I can feel that betrayal. Yeah.
But they were never my mommy and daddy, right? So that's how you see, especially in the sort of activist truther world, there's a lot of that kind of righteous indignation that is the adolescent awareness of the fact that our parents can't love us, right? They actually can't love us the way that we need. And the anger is part of finding, right? Finding you, finding your spine, finding your no. And that was essentially the first rupture. And then I've had several since, including in 2015 when my mentor died, Nick Gonzalez. He died suddenly. And I had developed a very deep relationship with him, and also been extremely expanded by his, he almost anointed me with a faith in the human body's capacity to orient beyond so-called illness into vitality. And he really believed and proved, if that's possible, that healing from anything is possible. Stage 4 cancers with multi-year survivals, decades of survival data that's never been matched in the conventional literature, to neurodegenerative illnesses. I needed that evidence, and he conferred to me a kind of a faith that I brought back to my practice, and then, was able to enjoy similar outcomes. I wouldn't say similar, because I don't have the decades that he had, but I had.
And were you staying in psychiatry at this time? So you went from sort of allopathic psychiatry into naturopathic psychiatry, or had you shifted entirely at that point?
So what's interesting is that I always identified as a psychiatrist. The women who came to me because of anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar.
And you always worked with women.
Diagnoses. I only ever worked with women. I had 3 male patients that came from the residency clinic with me. So sweet. Yes, but that was my, my shingle was hung as a women's health provider. So I was always focused on so-called mental illness, but the outcomes that I was getting were inclusive of their so-called comorbidities, right? So these other things that they were dealing with, Crohn's disease, or irritable bowel, asthma, different kinds of allergy sensitivities, autoimmune conditions. And here I am, lupus, I'm getting these outcomes, resolution of these illnesses that I am not specialized in. And it wasn't until I worked with my mentor that I had a better understanding of like why, when you reset the autonomic nervous system, all the things, come into homeostasis. You don't need a specific treatment for, according to me and him, for a specific illness. It's, more attuned to the system itself. And when he died, I felt abandoned. I felt deeply abandoned, and
abandoned personally, or abandoned because he had died and he was supposed to be the healer.
Correct. And he was like a father figure, he was a father figure for me. And so I was working through, I think when I began to work through a lot of my father wound stuff.
Quick aside, I am just starting that journey. And so I
got some tips.
Any hot tips on the father wound? That might be a whole nother podcast. But
yeah, I mean, I love this subject. And, I also offer the caveat that like the way I speak about father and mother woundology, like it just is what makes sense to me. It's not like, some like tried and true system.
Yeah, but like anytime if you've driven from LA to New York, like you might know the best restaurants or a hotel that you enjoyed. Totally. Or like I always like getting notes from the future.
Totally. For me to distill down like what is the father wound even, and what do I mean by that? It helps me to think about this statement like I am not safe, right? Whereas like when I think about the mother wound, and there's nuance to this, right? When I think about the mother wound, I think I am not loved, right? So if we're working on the I am not safe, there is a biological reality for women walking this plane that is any man can kill you with his bare hand anytime he wants to, right? Step on over and kill you with his bare hands, and that the hierarchy of strength and speed and capacity to physically harm is a biological, in my opinion, reality, because apparently that's an opinion these days. And we walk the earth with that in our systems, right? The vigilance that is required, of our animal bodies to always be assessing and surveying how safe are we, right? There's a relational reality that whether you're heterosexual, having sex with men, partnering with men as a woman or not, you live in a world with men. There's no escaping this seeming, warfare. And I think there's so many ways that we've been enculturated to, as women, engage a zero-sum game with men. I call it the war on masculinity. And the whether you consider, the sexual revolution, a lot of New Age programming and feminist perspectives, we are pretty steeped in victim consciousness as women at this point, right? So no fair. Why did this happen to us? All these, whatever history you want to invoke, millennia of so-called patriarchy, and it's time for us to get ours, right? It's time for reparations of a sort. And we were, I think, sold, especially by a lot of liberal feminism, we were sold the promise that we would feel safer if we were more free. And I just don't know that that's occurred on a social level.
Do you think it's about freedom, or do you think it's about power, like an equal representation of power?
We were also told that like status and the status that men enjoy is something that we should share, right? So and I was absolutely this, like an emulative feminist. So if I could be, I took birth control continuously for 12 years. I never bled.
You never bled?
Yeah, it's called continuous cycling.
Oh, like the annual or something.
I mean, now it's called that, but
okay.
I like hacked orthotricycline and I did that for myself back in the day. Yeah.
Oh, wait, Annuel is actually,
I don't even know.
Annuel is a Saturday Night Live sketch.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. And they're like, Annuel, you only bleed once a year, but when you do, hang on to your fucking hats. Like it was like a joke about like once a year you would bleed and like all of the hormone, all of the rage would come out. And I love that I just like straight faced asked you if you were on Annuel, which is an SNL sketch.
But like basically also, yes. Art mimicking life. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, I did that because I didn't want to be bothered and because I was very steeped in the intention to match my, male peers.
Yeah.
I went to MIT also, and I also was of the generation where the sexes were balancing out, but historically it was pretty much almost an all-male college, and I entered into a seemingly male-dominated profession. And so, yeah, the promise that I could enjoy the same status and that I could experience the sexual freedom to fuck like a man and have casual, meaningless sex. Not that I really have ever partaken in that, but the freedom to do so. These were the promises delivered to, our generation. And the truth is that at the peak of my activist career, I was able to see, and when this father figure departed, I was able to see, wow, I am fucking terrified. And I had already brought children into the world.
Terrified of what?
This entire world, everything about this world that I live in. I'm terrified of the man. That's why meaning the capital T, capital M, man, the man. That's why I am
the man,
an activist. That's why I am in this adolescent rebellion, I would say, of like fighting back so that I can win and show him. I am terrified of all of the ways that things seem wrong in the world, whether it's environmental or, health related or academically, educationally, or financially, because when you start to go down the activist hole, it's hard not to collect a lot of different grievances.
There's a lot of things to activate.
Exactly. A lot of things to be upset about. And then I was in the sort of fear porn layer of biomedical activism that says, people are going to come, the feds are going to come knock on your door and forcibly inject your kids and take them away if you refuse, kind of a narrative. And that's very real in the spaces that I used to traffic in, which was with a lot of mothers of vaccine-injured children. And there's a lot of anger and a lot of pain. And so I felt when he left that I was just totally alone. It's amazing. I don't often tell this story, but I went to his apartment after he passed, and I was in his office making all sorts of like frantic phone calls and basically trying to figure out what happened. And I saw a book right on his shelf. All the books were, with their spine, except one on this shelf. And the book, I've never looked it up on like Amazon to see if it's even what the hell this book even is. But the book said, the title was "You're in Charge Now." No, it's for real.
And it was, the paper was out, or it was facing the cover?
The face of the book was out instead of on its spine.
You're in charge now.
You're in charge now. And so a lot of what I've come to understand about this integration, I call it like a maturation of the inner father. And by the way, since we mentioned knowing Omar Pani, he is not a fan of this rhetoric. We have like a debate going because he's like, you don't have an inner father, you're a woman. And I get that. I don't know what a father feels like. I don't know what a man feels like. So I can't possibly have a reference point.
Masculine and feminine.
He disagrees.
Really?
I'm just saying. I like caveats. Okay. So
okay, great.
Yeah.
So just for context, Om is a professional dom and teaches BDSM and is a mutual friend and has, very strong opinions and ideas. So, okay, thank you for that caveat. I also spent 4 hours interviewing Zach Books yesterday about the atomic structure of the masculine and feminine inside of every single atom and cell. And that he was actually talking about the cells and like there's cube-like structures, which is the masculine, but that the energy is the feminine, and it changes the cube-like. But that's at the atomic level. Forget about gender identity. Forget about hormones. It's actually, our bones are masculine, our blood is feminine. So, anyway, I'm sure we could go down the rabbit hole.
Who fucking knows?
Yes,
it's basically, as I mentioned, where I've arrived. I enjoy hearing all the theories, and
the humility is really inspiring.
It helps me, like the concept of there being energetic signatures within me. Like helps me to organize my intentions and my behavior. So anyway, what I have found is that in the maturation of this, otherwise sort of like tyrant-y, like dude inside of me, right? Who's like, can't believe you fucking did that again. What's wrong with you? Get your shit done. Are you really going to go out like that? Like that's how that dimension of me, you could also through parts work call it like certain protector parts, right, would talk to me like most of my life. So the maturation of that into, what I would call like the perfect husband inside of me, who is always caretaking my body, always caretaking my desires, who's making sure that situations and conditions are conducive to the fulfillment of my desires, who's not putting me in fucked up situations where I'm going to be engaged, stress physiology and fawning and, sort of having this sense again of the world is not safe. What am I doing here? The maturation of that has, unfortunately, annoying plot twist, required that I offer myself these dimensions of, self sort of stewarding, I guess, and develop masculine competencies. So as I have learned how to take care of myself, so this is like the light side of the wound that says, I don't need anyone. Like I'm self-sufficient. I'm unto myself. I remember I was working with Esther Perel, as like a patient, years ago in New York, and with my then husband. And I remember
I also worked with Esther Perel with my ex-husband. I
mean,
love our synchronicities. There's a lot of them.
That's a good one. That's because it's a unique experience. She's a phenomenon. And she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, Kelly, your problem is that you don't let anybody know that you need them. And it was totally true. I was like indicted on the spot. And that is not conducive to a healthy, polarized, romantic dynamic. It's also really not conducive to facilitating the kinds of man-woman dynamics that render the world safer for women, right? So what I have come to believe is that when men feel needed, when they feel that they have a place, they have worth, they have a role to fulfill. And part of the way we can offer that is to, Om calls it make every man bigger, right? We can show appreciation, admiration, and turn on that green light rather than the red light that's turned on through criticism. And I know better how to man than you do, so let me help you, silly gentleman.
This literally happened last night. So I was driving home from the podcast studio. My boyfriend's driving. He doesn't know LA. He's navigating somewhere, and we're trying to go to a restaurant, and blah blah blah. And we're on a 5-lane highway. People are going 70 miles an hour. And he just stops with no blinker. He just stops and then he changes lanes. I'm leaned back, which is unusual for me. I'm in the passenger seat. I'm literally reclined back, answering emails, doing work because I had been podcasting all day. And I hear this honk, and then another car honk, and then a third car honk, 3 people very angry. Seemingly my life is now in danger. Right. Seemingly my friend's very expensive car is now in danger. And
more importantly,
I'm like, we're not insured for driving. I go into full fight or flight, feel my nervous system do it. And I'm actively in this like healing the father wound. I'm actively trying to stop emasculating every man around me because I can do it all myself. And so I was just like, I just sat in the fight or flight. I sat in the upset and I was just like, just feel it, Emily, like just feel it. And I was like, I am safe. I'm safe. I'm safe. This car is fine. I am safe. And I just tried to like let myself watch this reaction instead of like what I usually would have done. And then finally we got to the restaurant and I just, and I don't know what I'm looking for here. Thanks for listening. I just look at him and I was like, I would like to drive home. And he said, okay. And then I got in the car and I drove
you get a D-.
home. Yeah, D-. So like, would you have just let him drive even though you actually felt like unsafe in that moment?
No. This is where the nuance comes in, right?
Did you know that the best way to support this podcast is actually by joining our email list? Ziva Meditation is the sponsor of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? This is my baby. This is what I've been doing for the past 13 years. And if you go to zivameditation.com/email, then you're going to be the first to be notified when we drop a new episode. You're going to get invited to free live teachings. And this is also where I share my most recent and my most profound transformations. So I'm going to invite you to go to zivameditation.com/email so that you never miss our offerings, get invited to free events, and you'll be the first to know about our retreats and our courses. So zivameditation.com/email is really where the party's at. And I want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for making this podcast such a success. It is a delight to share these guests and these teachings with you.
So I actually think that in driving, it sounds so mundane and trivial. Like, why would that be significant? When you are driving with a man, okay, so let's say your partner but it could even be, this comes up for me if I'm in an Uber and I have a male Uber driver. Like I often will be like, no, turn here. And really holding myself as I feel that impulse to micromanage, but not, right? Because there's a bit of a gaslight when you tell yourself I'm safe and you don't feel safe. That's like when we were kids, we were told like, you're okay. But they're like, no, I'm not fucking okay. I'm not okay. Look at me. Yeah. So what I have found to be the most, like actually tangibly effective work in these moments is to like actually validate in ways, like interest myself in the part that is sounding the alarm, right? Rather than trying to coerce that part into agreeing that everything is fine. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, everything actually is fine. You look around, you feel your butt in the chair, your back, you orient to the here and now, and everything most of the time is fine, even when those alarms are going off, right? Mm-hmm. So when we make the parts that are sounding the alarm bad and wrong, they don't get that gaze, they don't get the attention that would allow them to be reassigned a different role. They're still behind the curtain. Right. So if you're interested in that part, right. So it's almost like if you imagine looking inside of your torso, like for me, I'm like, you can like feel where the part lives and you can look at it and you can just sort of be like, I'm with you. I see that this is like not okay. Something is not okay right now. Tell me what's not okay. Like, tell me more. And that kind of curious orientation, it just alleviates some of the pressure that I think that part would otherwise feel to act and commandeer and dominate in a situation that it seems like we would feel safer to take the wheel. But my allegation is that it's actually cumulatively, sort of generally a less safe world when you have to drive home. And so of course I'm joking that like, there's no wrong thing to do, because also honoring your needs and meeting your needs, including if that's that you don't feel safe with somebody else driving. But I would say that if in our partnerships we look at, if I could never say, it sounds again silly, but if I could never say a word in the car with my man again, would I still drive with him? It's like a metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. Like the men that we choose, in my opinion, should be men that we can fall asleep like, babies in the passenger seat with no problem. Again, metaphorically, but also literally. So if, I choose a man that I feel the need to micromanage in the car, then do I trust him to drive in life? And is that kind of polarity available? And not everybody's interested in a polarized relationship. So I'm only speaking to, right, that aspiration to experience like the kind of caretaking, leadership, guidance, and, responsibility for vigilant assessment of the safety of a situation that a man might take in a relationship with a woman and relative to a woman, to allow her to, soften into her creative, connected, flowy way of being, and to reveal through her body her heart wisdom, like as Data calls it, her the navigational compass that is her feelings and her emotions. So all of that is to say that I got to a place where I, again, as somebody who was in a default comportment towards the world, that the world is not trustworthy, nobody really is. Oh my God, I just had like an intrusive thought of my Italian grandmother saying, can trust, can trust. Like she literally would say that to me when I was a kid. What does that mean? I don't know.
Trust what? God, nature, the universe?
All of it.
Men.
You can't. So again, the plot twist is that you don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to trust your partner. You don't have to trust people in the world. Like you don't have to like figure out whether somebody's trustworthy. I know I thought you were, but you weren't. If you trust yourself, if you know how to discern through the sensations in your body, and I know you know this, but that something is a yes or a no, and you follow through on that and you listen to it, then you can be around a sociopath or a lover and you've got you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the same as like the avoidant, like, I got myself, like I don't need anyone energy. So when you are in this, this journey of like self-containing, right? Offering yourself the nervous system grounding that is assessing the capacity for a situation to actually meet your needs, and then speaking your needs when they are relevant or meeting them yourself when you can. You are already in a safer world. And so when we confer that to ourselves, it can sometimes require that we learn how to do shit as women. Like in my recent years, like I've bought a house, leased a car, changed the oil, like done all these things that, and let alone like learning about, all of this, all of the ways that we can emancipate ourselves from like the legal system into sovereignty, all these things that I was like, oh, my husband will deal with all of that, and amazing for the women who attract that kind of polarity early in their lives and enjoy that. That was not my journey. And I have found that as I learn how to do these things myself and I move through the intimidation factor, that I am no longer relating to men from that princess energy of like, fix this for me, save this for me. And when I ask for help, it's because it feels good, to receive that support and help. It's not from a place of dependency. And so the strategy and manipulation that attends that kind of, I can't do this for me, and so I need it. I think strategy and manipulation gets a bad rap, but it's only the indirect meeting of needs that we don't see a direct way of meeting otherwise. And so none of that is really as necessary when you can handle it yourself and you're choosing to get support because it feels good to. So we also, right, like you can assess like, what is it that, like for me, time containers are important. Which is interesting that I didn't ask. I almost did, but I didn't ask you, like, how long do you, do we typically chat for, kind of a thing?
Usually an hour and a half.
Thank you.
Retroactively.
But apparently, I didn't need it in the moment. But often I need to know, like, how long is something going to be? Like, what is my work window? What is my play window? I need time containers. That's how I allow my body to drop in.
Flow.
Yeah. And not everybody needs that. But you learn the language of your own self-containment. Like, what are the things that you need in a given situation to feel okay? You're responsible for identifying whether those are actually available.
So I want to just highlight and underscore some of the things you said. One is that if you are feeling triggered, if you are feeling upset, if you're going to do parts work or internal family systems, it's not about when I was feeling triggered and there was a part of me that was very scared. It's not about saying like, okay, well, your body's actually fine, you're safe.
Right. For me, it's not. Yeah, it hasn't worked to do that.
I mean, I fully I hate it when people do that to children. I actively don't do that to my son. I'm never like, you're fine, you're fine. I may tell him he is safe. Like if his body, I might be like, you know, your body is safe.
That's
Did
different.
that hurt? You know, and that's what I was telling my body is that I am safe. But you're right. There was a minimizing there of the feelings. And so, and it's like, I know that intellectually, but I couldn't remember it in the trigger.
Totally.
And so that feels helpful to be like, oh, actually there's a part of you that really wants to be heard. There's a part of you that really wants to be seen and listened to and be curious about. And then maybe once that part is heard, it can be reassigned. And then thank you for validating, like, I actually, like, at this point, like, did not feel safe in the car. It wasn't just like, fine, I'll do it. Like, it by the time I asked to drive, it wasn't coming from a place of like, fuck it, fuck you. It was just like, I actually think our physical bodies in this car will be safer if I drive home, which I don't know if that's true or not, but that is how I felt. But I guess the question that I have is if we're going to be like, follow that Om Rapani advice of like, make the man big, like, and not come from that princess energy, which can be manipulative of like, oh, help me, you know, damsel in distress.
Damsel in distress, yeah.
So like, I'm just curious if you've found, if you can like sort of help me see an archetype of this queen, this sovereign human who has figured stuff out and knows how to hold herself, has shifted this critical father into a loving husband internally. Like, what does that look like of making a man big from that place?
It's like
or helping a man to remember his bigness. You can't make anyone anything. But.
Right. Yeah, some of it's semantics. It's like I remember I worked with a coach named Whitney for a couple of years, Erotic coach, and it was game changing for me. And I remember one of the images she offered me was like a lioness with like a full belly, like scanning the savannah.
Like pregnant with a full belly?
No, full with like food.
She's eaten.
She's eaten. And she's scanning for more food, right? Kind of a thing. So like when you have this sense of like, oh, I'm full. And Data says this too, like the feminine essence is full and wanting more, always wanting more. Never, ever, ever is there a moment that the feminine essence arrives at satiety, right? Like, so if you invoke the feeling of that fullness, you almost like feel your energetics rest back. Right? You find your spine a bit. And if you're still sort of scanning for what you might want, you can feel energy here, like in your heart, like, what do I want? What do I want? Right. And so you're sort of strong spine, soft heart. And when you are interacting woman to man from that place, there is like a devotional energy that I think becomes available, and not just to your chosen man, but to men, you know, the other sex. And I remember thinking, and when I first started this practice, which was like a couple years ago.
Which practice?
Oh, of like making every man bigger, no longer speaking ill of men. I mean, because a lot of, there's so much truth in like the hen pecking commiseration that we do as women to compensate for the ways that we don't feel safe. Like, so we should talk men to each other. And I committed to doing my best not to do that, right? Whether it's somebody's ex or some public figure or whatever.
Yep.
And so when I committed to this, I remember, you know, like I would show my authentic appreciation for somebody helping me with my suitcase or whatever. And I remember having that sense that there's strings attached. Like there is an obligation I might have to give something I don't want to give if I open in this way energetically. And of course that's programming, right? that there are poor bargains that we are compelled to make as girls and as women. And if you give your heart energy to any extent, you're inviting something, you know.
Or if you're in your sexual turn on, that you're inviting something. If you're in your eroticism, that you will invite unwanted attention in a predatory civilization.
Right. And there is truth to that. That is a reality. And there is as you know, there's a mastery that we can develop around that energy, when to open it, when to close it, how to deliver it, what archetypes to invoke, you know, the wife, the girlfriend, you know, the matriarch, whatever it is. And no one is really teaching us this, right? So like when and how do we develop the capacity to refine these essential dynamics? And again, when I say essential, it's for our own experience as women. It's to make this world safer for us. And that's why, you know, that's the reframe of like, yes, it could be a good idea, you know, to show respect and admiration to anyone. It could be a good idea to offer that to the men in your life, your brother, your uncle, you know, your handyman, whatever, your partner. And it's a good idea if what you want for yourself is a certain experience of being a woman. So, you know, I'm a sacred selfishness advocate. I've taken a lot of heat for that.
Selfishness.
Yeah,
What's
meaning
that?
like I believe in a woman serving herself first and over her children, over her partner. And, you know, you could say that this is also how we serve God. You know, you could get metaphysical about it, but it's pretty practical, you know, that self-care is self-attunement is the imperative that you focus on what it is that you need at all times. And that is how you gift to the world. It's actually not possible, in my opinion, to engage philanthropy and altruism and generosity if you don't have a good practice of knowing yourself and exposing to your own awareness your intentions, because otherwise your intentions will remain covert and there's an unspoken exchange. You know, anytime, think of sometime you've given somebody something generously and they like didn't appreciate it. You know, most of us can remember what that felt like, and there's resentment, there's bitterness, there's disappointment. And that's how you can see there was an unspoken exchange, that their gratitude was expected in exchange for what it was that you were giving. And you didn't give it because you wanted to. You gave it because you were going to get something that they didn't consent to give. And so when we look at all of the ways that women have obviously a fundamental caretaker impulse, and we recognize how much codependency and, you know, insecure attachment can belie that impulse, we can only resolve it through self-focus, self-discovery, self-study, and creating the conditions within ourselves, which again is that self-husbanding, to hold space for the shame, you know, that arises when we recognize why we were really doing something. Really. Right?
Like getting wise to your own intentions with radical transparency and honesty.
It's not easy. And sometimes it takes like an observant friend to point it out, or a coach, you know, because like one of the ways that I learned, I was like blending intentions between an offer and an ask, was when it was pointed out to me, you know, like that I was like all, you know, indignant that somebody wouldn't sit down and have a rational conversation to conflict resolve with me. And I was telling my coach, you know, I was like, can you believe this? You know, it's so ridiculous. It's never available for this kind of calm adult discourse. And she's like, Kelly, who is the irrational one? When you know full well the nature of the dynamic, you know that, you know, expecting a rational response from the irrational source is, you know, you can see that you're the one who is being irrational. And she said, you offered him this opportunity to sit down and talk. And what you were really doing was asking for something. You wanted to feel better, safer, you know, in the world with this closure. Like, I'm a big closure. Like, I need all the things tied up. The loose ends are super growth edge for me. And she said you were actually asking for something, but you framed it as an offer. And we do this all the time. Like, hey, I'm available, you know, to have this discussion if you want, instead of expressing a pure desire. Like, I want to talk to you because I don't feel comfortable. Right? Or worse. And then sometimes we say, oh, I wouldn't say that shit. That's not even appropriate to the situation or whatever. And so when you smoke out your true intentions and your real ask, you might reorient behaviorally, and you might not even say the thing. So,
or just ask for what you want. Like, the second that you said that, a list of times that I've done that started scrolling through my head.
No, we do it.
So like, that feels like a really valuable nugget. Like, when are you asking for something, and when are you offering something, and when are you blending those two things?
Yeah.
Even cleaning that up feels like it would really improve someone's life quite a bit.
Totally.
I'm curious if any of your work in the erotic arts, or like befriending and discovering your own desires sensually, sexually, have helped you with that. Because I find that for me, I know we have sort of differing views on monogamy, but like for me, and being in play spaces has made that skill really, really important.
I can imagine.
Of like, you got to get so crystal clear on what your desire is, and you have to be brave enough to name it in a space, and you got to be even more clear on what your boundaries are. And even if, because I'm partnered, so it's like, if I don't name my desire, then my poor partner has to like get into compersion with like infinite amount of possibilities, which is too much for any one human to do.
Totally.
And so it's actually helped me quite a lot in business, and it's helped me quite a lot in my life to be able to check in with my body and be like, what do I desire? Because I was so good at outsourcing that. Well, does everyone else need my whole life?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like, how has your relationship with your own eroticism helped you to not conflate those two things?
Yeah, I so relate to everything that you're saying. And I think this is such an important dimension of like feminine empowerment, is simply to develop the practice of knowing what you need and want and speaking it. I mean, it's just the hardest work.
Which goes back to your original intention of like, why isn't everyone honoring their no? Why isn't everyone honoring their yes?
Yeah. And I understand why, because we have associated that expression with consequence, you know?
No.
And yeah, because if there is, I mean, the exquisite vulnerability of asking for what you want, somebody could say no, somebody could laugh, you know, somebody could be, their desire could be at odds, and we would have to recognize incompatibility when it's like way more kinky to just like live in that dysfunctional space of like incompatibility masquerading as companionship, you know? And I have found through Betty Martin's work.
I don't know her.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
What do I need to know about
welcome.
Great.
That's
so
wild.
Excited.
That's wild. Okay, I'm excited. And I don't want to act like I'm some ambassador who can accurately represent her work. However, I am very familiar with it. But here it goes. And I will do that, just that.
Well, I think you can speak to your experience of it, certainly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So her body of work is around the wheel of consent. It's called.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Okay. So I was like, there's no way you've not heard of this. And she talks about giving and receiving, taking and allowing as being these different quadrants of consent. And a lot of what she says is exactly what you just said. That's why I'm surprised, because you already get it, which is that often we are in dynamic, especially sexually, but also in the world, where we imagine that we're going to derive pleasure from our partner's pleasure, right? Most of us are like, oh, I just feel so good when you're having a good time and you feel good. That's what feels good to me. And what happens is, you know, people engage sexually, and like nobody's actually getting their primary pleasure needs met because they're in somebody else's mind, you know, reading experience. Mm-hmm. And then the encounter is over and you're like, how was that for you? Like, you have no idea. So it's not like you're attuned and able to like
actually get inside
feel
their body.
into, right? It is a trauma field. I mean, I don't think use those words, but it's enmeshment trauma, where we imagine that if we can read the room sufficiently and guess and anticipate what's needed, that we will, gain secure connection. And so what she helps to clarify is the directionality of giving and what looks like somebody doing to somebody else. Okay. So if you think of like getting a massage, right? So the person who is massaging is giving the touch for the person who is receiving the massage. But if you think about petting a cat, most of the time, the person who's petting the cat is actually the one who's experiencing the pleasure from the cat's body, taking pleasure from the cat, but they look the same. It's a hand on the cat, a hand on the...
But you could argue that the cat is also receiving pleasure, at least from their eyes.
Not
but
my
cats.
Cats.
But we don't know. Your cats don't like to be pet?
No.
Okay.
I like molest my cats regularly.
Okay, I was staying at a house with this witch, and she has a cat. And just this morning, he was meditating on my lap, and I was petting him, and his eyes got all this, and he started purring. But in this case...
But with most pets, like, we don't ask... I mean, I shouldn't generalize. There's not consent, but, it just feels good to touch them, right? Like... So, for example,
like kids often, we're like petting or hugging kids,
their hair,
and like toddlers
them.
don't really want to be hugged sometimes.
100%.
Yeah.
So this concept of taking touch is changing the direction of pleasure in a way that we are not typically conscious of owning, right? So like, how often does it happen that a man's like, oh, I'd love to give you, like your lover or whatever, like I'd love to give you a massage, and what he really wants to do is fuck you, right? But he's like, doesn't know how to ask that or claim it or take it directly. So he's giving to get. And so what she encourages is cleaning up awareness of these different directions. And she has simple exercises like one of them, I just had a woman named River Roaring who was at my event, Audacious Embodiment event, and she presented and talked about waking up the hands, right?
Oh, it's a great name. Audacious Embodiment.
Thank you.
I love it. And I just did an event 2 weeks ago called Audacious Magic. And I was like, what is happening?
These words, they're so
good.
Yeah, they're powerful.
Okay, so we're touching River.
So you have a partner, right? And you ask me to touch your hand in the way that you want your hand to be touched for your pleasure, right? So that's the masseuse and that model. But then I touch your hand because I want to kind of feel what that knuckly part feels like. And I want to feel what your thumb feels like. And I want to wake up my own skin. And you could do this with an object. It's like a meditation. You could take a pen and touch it for 3 minutes and touch it because you want to feel the pleasure that your fingers have in making contact with, these different surfaces. And when you do that, then you know who is asking to engage a body for whose pleasure. Like, what direction is the pleasure going and what direction is the consent going, right? So you're allowing your body to be touched for another's pleasure. That's a very different thing than that person doing the same behavioral movements to the body for your pleasure. So, you're familiar with BDSM. This is the idea of organizing the energetics of giving and receiving into 2 domains. And what happens is that it actually serves both people to be aware of these roles, the parameters, and the directionality. Right? So the dom is serving the sub's desires. And that has translated, most of my exploration of this has been, I've been celibate. And so you could say like, well, how do I even know what the point of any of this is? But it's translated directly to pretty much every interaction I have in the world where I am orienting all the time.
You've been celibate for how long?
A little over 2 years.
And Layla was just doing a podcast the other day with our friend Sahara, and they were talking about like celibate with the goddess, meaning like she was making love to herself, making love to God, like, or are you just not engaging?
Oh, I self-pleasure. Oh, okay, no,
great.
all the time.
Okay, great. Great. So you're like
In fact, I am right now. No,
thank God.
no.
So your goddess celibate.
Yes, that's a good qualification. Yes, because of course there's such a thing as really like moving in a different direction from.
So would you engage with someone like like a professional dom inside of the celibacy or no?
So I have, and I'm going to Kimmy's event.
Great. Our mutual friend Kimmy Inch, who's an amazing
Yes.
professional dom and somatic therapist.
Yes. Yeah. And I had an experience at my event, Audacious Embodiment, with her that was, oh my God, extraordinary. Like in front of 100 women. It was not planned, not scripted. She's like, oh, do you want to just be like my spanking demo? And I was like, sure, no problem. Like, obviously I show my ass on the internet. I don't have a problem showing it to, like 100 beautiful women I've curated, to be in a room with me. And, oh my gosh. I mean, I have the recordings available for sale.
Great. Yeah, give us the pitch.
Give me that plug.
Give me the affiliate
Oh my God,
link.
because it's like, how do I even explain what happened? She's so gifted. She's very talented, master of her craft. And she just really felt into, first of all, she offered me like containment, right? So touching my body in a certain way so that she could assess whether I felt comfortable. And, I'm like leaning up on this chair and then she just started to say these statements to me about, my power as a woman and just sort of like, I don't know, nice things to say, wasn't
affirming it.
Yeah, affirming statements. And somehow she brought me into this like vulnerable rhetorical space. Like I started tearing up. And then she asked that she asked that I pick a girlfriend to come on stage with me, and I picked my girlfriend, Sarah.
So not a sexual partner, just to be clear.
No,
like a friend.
just my friend.
Who is a woman.
Yeah. And there were pretty much only women in the room. And she kneeled in front of me, my friend, and she instructed my friend to talk about how, oh my God, it makes me cry, how much she loves me. And at the same time, she is like spanking me, telling me that if I ever fucking forget that, I will be punished, right? So it's like such a twist on like the tired, cartoonish, like, I'll spank you if you're naughty, kind of a thing, where she talks about how it's like invoking this dynamic of like your higher self in playful intolerance of your own deprecation, like self-deprecation. No, it was next level.
Playful intolerance of your own self-deprecation. That is where it's at.
It was really, and then she recruited all the women in the room to come up to the stage and like reinforce, this message.
For you.
For me. But it was like the feedback that I've gotten from these women is it was for all of us.
Yeah.
Like it was absolutely the universal experience of like playing hide and seek with your own
divinity.
Yes. And your own radiance.
But that part does need to be put in line. That like out of control critical father or that out of control critical mother, like that part does need boundaries. It does need.
It's true. And that's why I like the play of this, right? Because it's not worked for me to simply say like, I'm going to stop doing that. I will now be confident.
It's like telling an alcoholic to stop drinking.
100%.
Good luck.
And there's a good reason why I have that voice that's like, I mean, like I was just telling this silly story yesterday, but like I was at the gym the other day and this woman comes up to me and she's like, oh my God, your hair is so pretty. I love your curls. And I was like, thank you. It's a lot of work. First of all, what does that mean? Second of all, I had this tired impulse to small myself, right? I didn't just say thank you. I had to like make sure she knew it was a lot of work that I have pretty hair, like
I've earned it. I didn't just get this
Thank
gift.
You. Yes. And interestingly, like I saw a comment on social media for this, I call it audacious entrepreneurship, this masterclass I'm doing. And I don't work very hard. Okay, like I work, this is right now I'm working, I consider this, and this will be 4 hours in my whole week that I'm working, okay? And I have a beautiful business and it's fantastic. Okay. And the feedback that I've gotten is, how dare I flaunt, how little I work, for my revenue streams and whatever. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating being reflected back to me, this programming that I clearly still have, that if I worked for it, I'm allowed to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm not just allowed to wake up with it, kind of a thing.
So when you saw the comment, did it inflame something? Did it trigger something in you? Or were you like, oh,
Yeah.
I did?
I mean, I'm from New Jersey. Okay. So I'm very sarcastic, and like, I like a little
Like to pick
sass.
a little fight.
Yeah. So I don't like practice that online, because actually I find social media has been like one of the greater spiritual crucibles for me over the past couple of years, like just to always take the triggering statements as an opportunity to meet the part of me that agrees,
Yes,
and so clearly that part is there. I just gave it the mic a few days ago when I said that my hair is so much work, and that's why it might be pretty, like you say, so that part that says if you work for it, you can have it, that's masculine conditioning, right? And it's absolutely in there.
Wounded masculine conditioning.
There's good reason, for that message to be in there, because it has been true. I worked my fucking ass off for a decade, building my practice and my expertise and all things. And that's probably why I allowed myself to move to Miami and start a different life and a different chapter, and orient towards my daughters as a mother, and prioritize play and dance, and have whole days where I like did nothing but work on a pole choreo, like literally for the entire day.
This is my dream. This is my dream. You're living my dream. I will sing it and dance it for you. I was also on Broadway for 10 years.
Oh my God, I could hear that. I was like, go girl, that's beautiful.
Yeah, the singing and dancing is where I came from.
Oh my God, amazing.
No, I just sit quietly in a chair for a living, but just not really.
Very still.
Very, very
no
still.
melody. Yeah, that's funny.
Oh, wow. So I would love to dive deeper into your erotic reclamation and how you started to make this part of your work. Because you had this whole chapter of your life where you're like deep in the allopathic medicine field. You have this another chapter of your life where you go into holistic naturopathy, whatever you want to call it, but like trust in helping the body's systems to integrate and work with each other.
I like that.
Your mentor passes, you feel abandoned, you start working on this father wound, and I'm sure many others. But how did the eroticism come into your life, and how did sensuality, man-woman relating, like how did these become your teachers, and then what inspired you to start to share it with people?